is also old. But over the past several years, AI has become front and center, and so it feels new to a whole lot of people. But because everybody is making much about AI, we thought that it was necessary for us to stop and think about how AI will reconfigure the field of Pidgin and Creole studies as it will for most things. I think one of the most interesting things I heard about AI was about somebody saying that when she heard about AI, what was sold to her is that AI, could do, poetry, write stories, summarize documents, etc. And she said that was unfortunate because what she wanted was something to do the dishes so that she could write poetry. So it will affect a lot of things, some directly, some indirectly. And we want to have a conversation about how exactly we should meet the future that is already here with us. We have, to help us to guide that discussion, Bettina Migger from UC College Dublin. She is joining us from Ireland online. Also, there is Professor Shalom Gooden. She is online in Zoomland. Here in person in the room with us is Professor Hubert Devonish, and he's a professor emeritus of UWI. And then there is Dr. Clive Forrester, who is a professor at the University of Waterloo in Canada. So I will turn over to Bettina Migger to do the formal opening of the roundtable on AI and the future of Pidgin and Creole linguistics.
Thanks very much, Joseph, and welcome to everybody. I'm looking forward to this discussion because, as we all know, it's an elephant in the room. And as I've often noticed in recent years, because I've been doing a bit of research in that area, is that we are actually doing a lot more using AI tools than either we think or we expect of each other. So I think it's a very good idea to take a closer look at what people do and how people conceptualize what they do, both in terms of their research work, of course, but also in terms of how they think this is serving their applied work, the communities that they work with, and so on. So because we're also a little bit late already, what I was thinking is that we start off this roundtable by first listening to the three invited speakers so that they give us a little bit of a view of where they are at and how they feel about AI, or what I prefer to call it, machine learning using language, because AI is a bit of a marketing term. So we can do that first. So maybe everybody takes about 5-6 minutes to talk about that, and then we can go around and work through a couple of questions depending on how much time we have. So what I suggest is that we start out, each of you talking about roughly 3 points. So what do you consider to be new and emerging technologies as they are phrased in the advert? And then what kinds of tools are you using, and maybe also why are you using them? And what are your main experiences? So roughly talk about these 3 points. So I don't know who wants to start talking. Shalom, do you want to start?
I can start, but I have to start also with an apology, which I always tell my students never to do. I prepared something that I will share, and it roughly lands on the things that you've asked me to do. So let me do that. Why? Hang on. I'm not sure why this is not allowing me to share. Maybe somebody else has to start. Because this is suddenly not allowing me to
Hey, see what you can do. But I don't know, Hubert, do you want to start?
Okay.
Go ahead, Hubert. Should I tell you again what it was, or? Go ahead. We can't hear you, Clive.
You can hear me, Bettina?
Now I can hear you.
Okay, I will start.
Okay, go ahead.
Good morning. All right.
Good morning.
So, I guess you could say my interest in artificial intelligence, these large language models, started like 1 month after it was announced that it was available to the public. And I just started to play around with it, and I noticed that, just like what Joseph said, it could do poetry, it could write something that sounds like a sensible, intelligible essay very quickly, very easily. And within a month of this thing being announced, it was like the start of the term, ChatGPT was already overloaded. So students were using it voraciously, right? And it was clogged. Anyway, so, needless to say, I started to think about the implications of how this might impact academic writing. And I did a paper and just put it on ResearchGate. Didn't review it, didn't send it to a journal or anything like that. And a professor at the University of Texas at Austin saw the paper and said, would you consider turning this into a chapter for publication we're working on? So that paper is now still on ResearchGate. If anybody wants to read it and talk about the ethical implications of artificial intelligence for academic writing. So that's already published and there for anybody to read. Now, I'm going to show you, it's better for me to show you than tell you of a particular application use. And I'm going to just play something from my computer here. All right. So I'm not sure how many of you know what an AI agent is. You might have heard the term, but it's more likely that you've interacted with one in the past. An AI agent is what you interact with when you call a company and there's this artificial sounding voice that's answering your questions or whatever. And I was hearing a lot about AI agents and how they can be used and so on. So I decided to create one. So I created an AI agent trained on everything that I've published. So, chapters, book chapters, whatever articles. I uploaded my entire dissertation into this AI agent. And I announced it on Facebook and said, hey, ask this AI agent anything you want about the work that I do. And people clicked and they called the AI agent, and I'll play some of the clippings for you here. All right, so here's the first one. I'm not sure who these persons are. All it does is it records the audio and it gives me a transcription of what was discussed, but I'm not sure who these persons are.
Hey there, I'm Q, research assistant trained on the work of linguist Dr. Clive Forrester. How can I help you today?
This is fascinating. I was just checking it out to see if it works.
I'm glad you find it fascinating. Is there anything specific about it that you'd like to discuss, or any questions you have about Dr. Forrester's work or forensic
I am just
linguistics
curious
in general?
about the way the Jamaican nation language is being treated in the country. of Jamaica, I just wonder why there is such resistance to its validity as a language.
That's a really insightful question. The resistance to recognizing Jamaican Creole, or patois, as a valid language in Jamaica is complex and has deep historical and social roots. Are you interested in exploring the historical context, the social
I
perceptions,
am
or perhaps the
primarily
political
interested in the
implications of this
political
resistance?
implications. I pretty much
So she cuts off the artificial intelligence agent and she's talking, and they go back and forth. And I think a part of the reason why it takes so long to respond sometimes is that it's not sure if she's asking a question or just making a comment. So it pauses a little bit. I'll play another one for you here. And as I said, I don't know who these persons are. They are Facebook friends, and they decided to interact with it. Here we go.
Hallo, ich bin Q, Forschungsassistent, ausgebildet auf der Arbeit des Linguisten Dr. Clive Forrester. Wie kann ich Ihnen heute helfen?
Woran forscht Clive jetzt?
Clive Forrester forscht derzeit an einer Vielzahl von Themen, darunter Sprachtechnik, akademisches Schreiben und die Schnittstellen von Sprache, Recht und sozialer Gerechtigkeit in der Karibik. Bevor ich ins Detail gehe, sind Sie mit diesen Themen vertraut oder bevorzugen Sie einen allgemeinen Überblick?
Einen allgemeinen Überblick bitte.
Sicher, gern. Clive Forrester untersucht, wie Sprache kulturelle Ausdrucksformen in der Karibik prägt und erhält. Und er befasst sich mit den sprachlichen und rhetorischen Werkzeugen in der Werbung. Er analysiert auch, wie sich jamaikanische Sprechweisen in Gerichtsverfahren auswirken. Macht das Sinn? Soll ich etwas klarstellen? Hey there.
So I'm not sure who that person was, not sure what they were talking about, but it can do this in 30 different languages. So I'll play one more. All right, so here's another one. So the kinds of questions that people invariably ask are questions I think you'd ask to a linguist, question that you'd ask to me. And when I look at the timestamps on the conversations, it appears that there were multiple calls at the same time, right? So there were overlapping calls. So it was talking to 3 or 4 different persons at the same time. So this person is asking about the basilect.
Hey there, I'm Q, research assistant trained on the work of linguist Dr. Clive Forrester. How can I help you today?
What is the most difficult Jamaican accent to understand?
That's a fascinating question. It really gets to the heart of how we perceive language. To answer accurately, I need to know what you mean by difficult. Are you asking which accent is hardest for non-Jamaicans to understand? Or which one is considered the least prestigious within Jamaica itself? Or something else?
Which regional accent within Jamaica is the most difficult to understand?
I see. When we talk about regional accents in Jamaica, we're usually referring to the different points along what linguists call a Creole continuum. The accent furthest away from standard Jamaican English, known as the basilect, can be quite challenging for those not familiar with it. Does that make sense?
What is the basilect?
The basilect is the variety of Jamaican Creole that's most different from standard Jamaican English. It's the form of speech that's generally considered the deepest or most traditional, and it often retains more African linguistic features. Should I clarify anything about that?
Provide an example.
Sure thing. A speaker of basilectal Jamaican Creole might say, "Me a go a the yard," which translates to "I am going to the yard" in standard English. The grammar and pronunciation are quite distinct from the standard variety. Does that help illustrate the difference?
Not really. Compare 2 basilicks, one less deep and one more deep.
Okay, I see what you're asking. It's tricky because deepness isn't really measured on a simple scale, but I can give you a general idea. A less deep basilect might be something like, him did gone a yard, meaning he had gone to the yard. The use of did to mark past tense is a common feature. A deeper basilect version could be, him ben gone a the yard, also meaning he had gone to the yard. The ben is a slightly older or more rural form of the past marker. Is that clearer?
So I'll just pause it there because so the sentences that this artificial intelligence agent is producing, I've never written them before. But it's somewhere probably in my dissertation where I talk about past tense marking and so on. And there's probably a publication or two where I talk about the continuum and the basilect and acrolect and so on. So it's drawing those connections based on scraping through the publications that it's trained on. I have some more examples, but I'll pause for here, so somebody else can jump in, right?
Okay, let me try to share again. All right.
Check.
Full screen. Are you guys seeing? Okay. All right. So my work is in sociolinguistics or sociophonetics research and connecting then with general language contact in Creole linguistics. And I wanted to dovetail this with a kind of what I see as a traditional, quote unquote, traditional business of universities in terms of involving the production of reliable information and scholarship, but also creative endeavors, education, and what Caribbean universities have long been involved in is service to communities. And in a lot of ways, places like where I work here in the US got into this later on. So in terms of what I do, I told you what I do. So I'm not a computational linguist. I don't do NLP, natural language processing. I don't do machine learning. I am and will forever remain a tool user. And so I'm coming at this from the perspective of a tool user. My experience with the precursor to what are now popular AI models began in 1999, I think. I was actually in Jamaica at the time and I received a call from Ohio State asking me what sort of funding I would have for the fall semester. And they didn't have any lined up, and Mary Beckman was on the other end of the call, and she said, "You have one now." And this was an AT&T Motorola project that she got funding for, and I was hired to work with English data. And my job was to help to code the data in a particular way that would then feed into a computational model that AT&T Bell Labs was building that would have then been the precursor to a call-in program, right? So you call in and you have a machine talking to you. So what we were doing at OSU was building the training model that this call-in feature was going to be using. So that was my my experience with it. And then years later, I worked with Don Winford to try to create a learning model for Sranan. That started, we never got anywhere further with that, and then I left for this job. And some point during the mid part of my career, I collaborated with a colleague from Carnegie Mellon University and their student to build a multilingual training model. And the part of the challenge that we had, I wanted something to work with Trinidadian and Jamaican. We did not have enough Trinidadian data. We did not have enough Jamaican data. And then I'm like, okay, my sociolinguistic literature tells me that there is African continuity between these varieties and also African American language. So I'm like, all right, let's patch it. So we patched the Trinidadian and Jamaican Creole data with African American English. And then we patched the rest of it with standardized forms of English. The model worked, and we got 80% accuracy on the test data. Fantastic. The bad side is it was absolutely not user-friendly. And so I backed off, I stepped away, and I'm like, no, that's not what I want to do or can afford to do. But so aside from that, I've worked with codes as tools for my own research and in training my students. And I think the way in which these sorts of models that and tools that have been available to computer scientists and computational linguists have come in force for how the rest of us do our research. I think it's a really game changer for how we can do linguistic research. So we are able to process a lot more data. We can ask new questions, and we can look back at old questions and test new hypotheses in new ways simply because we have more data on hand and we can ask those questions. So in terms of where I work, I happen to be in the Office of the Senior Vice Chancellor for Research, where I work with Dr. Rob Cunningham, who is Vice Chancellor for Research Infrastructure. And one of the things that Rob Cunningham did is to give this talk at Pitt here in 2023, and he kindly offered me his slides. So he is the person behind AI, or one of the persons behind AI at Pitt. And so I'll share some of the things that Rob shared. So generative AI is the thing that we're focused on. And one of the things that Rob did is to use these non-commercial things, right? So we've heard about ChatGPT. That's just one of the kinds of things that are now in the public space, and it's moving very fast. So what he did is to do a comparison on the kinds of things that these different GPTs did. And this was at the time, right? So there are rapid changes, right? So it can do pass at that time, law, bio, math, US history, but at the time, not advanced calculus, or didn't do so well at English literature, right? So he just was giving this mock-up to show how fast this kind of thing is changing and the kinds of things it's able to do by scraping the web and whatever sources for existing data out there. Here's some, but one of the things that we know is that it includes some biases and it includes, fabricated answers. We also know it's not responsible, it's not ethical, and there are some safety issues. So one of the things that we have to consider in using this is, which is a part of what we're discussing here at this conference, is intellectual property and fair use. So here are some of the things that can go wrong. As linguists, we know, for example, typical structure, how many eyes does a giraffe have? We know the giraffe is a noun phrase, and we can talk about other parts of the structure. So using the same thing, how many eyes does my foot have? In the same way that the giraffe is a noun phrase, my foot is also a noun phrase. But as humans, we know that eyes don't have feet. So here is what you will get. Same thing, a noun phrase in the foot, right? Your foot, in the same way that the giraffe is a noun phrase. You get what looks like, and it is, a perfectly good syntactic construction. A giraffe has two eyes. Your foot has two eyes, right? And we know that pragmatically, that's not accurate. There are also other examples of biases in terms of how these kinds of things can be used. We know that there are companies that are using AI to assess suitability for those who will be hired, and there's documentation that this has negative effects for women, and there are other kinds of things. But let me kind of jump ahead. There's descriptions and understandings for me in terms of research on sound systems of languages. We can gain a lot in terms of learning more about increased accuracy and complexity of how these systems work. Part of this has been due to the availability of large-scale corpora. Yesterday in Sylvia's talk, there was some discussion about databases for Creole languages. And I really liked what Susanna said in the discussion in the comments, that we have something that started and now we have a base on which to start and we can really push it and go forward. And I think that's where we are. Systems like diachronic principles that guide sound chains, we can learn more by having more data. And we can learn more about how these systems change over time and how such changes serve to differentiate among different language varieties, for example, English. But the problem is most of the existing knowledge that we have is based on the so-called majority languages, so-called language of the inner circles, so-called high resource languages. And I have all sorts of issues with that when we think about high resource. So what I want to do is kind of peel back and think about what is behind this system. When we think about these GPTs, when we think about these learning models, there's a lot that depends on data. And Sylvia's talk yesterday really focused on data and what kinds of data we have, what kinds of data we can get, how we streamline these data, how we categorize them, even in the discussion that Clive just shared in terms of the speaker asking the computer, basilectal, what do you mean? It goes back to data. There is a lot of cost in terms of getting the right data, training the data, and then have it then fused into how these systems work, right? So a lot of what we're looking at now as these GPTs are based on very, very large data sets. And it's a lot of massive computing effort that goes into this. And what people are tending towards now are these models that can use the existing data, extrapolate into a new context. And so we're calling them learning models. So when Clive said, I didn't give it this particular thing, but yet it produces things. That's exactly what it's doing. It's learning, meaning it's extrapolating from existing resources and then moving forward. So the magic here is in the change from supervised systems to unsupervised supervising training models. And that's the generative piece on AI. And I'm going to skip through these because that's, So these large learning models, we have to think then what we mean by low resource. This is from the perspective of the analyst. It's not the perspective of speakers, right? So from the former viewpoint, it signals to speakers that their language, that their linguistic system is inadequate, right? So when we talk about these learning models, you also have to think about what it means on the part of users and speakers. In natural language processing, languages are categorized by whether they're high resource or low resource, meaning literally how much data does this large learning model have or not have. So low resource languages, for these purposes, lack sufficient data to be used for these machine learning exercises or for processing. And so that's why I gave the example of me having to patch with these other things. And so the languages that had the benefit of having writing systems earlier so people can produce a lot of data, then become these high resource languages with a lot to contribute. I wanted to also mention something very quickly from David Harvard's talk that was given at CMU in 2022. When these things are pitched for language learning models, they say, well, they learn in the way or mimic how humans speak. Harvard said very clearly, this is not how humans learn speech, right? And so that's the basic thing. So it's trying to mimic, but it's not how and what we know about humans and how they learn speech. So here is something else. Again, pulling some other things. Speaking specifically about ChatGPT, this is from a humanist, how I see it, humanities and generative AI. It says ChatGPT has no intrinsic political or moral message for us, no matter how often we try to conjure up one on its behalf. But its effect will mirror and magnify those we already have, generating for ourselves individually and in the society of others. It thus becomes newly important to deliberate on and try to shape through democratic voices our public discourse. So we deceive ourselves to think that we can just hand over this task to an impersonal technology, sacrificing risky freedoms, etc. So again, my positionality here is as a tool user. So we're in this new era in the context of which Creole language research is, and I don't think it serves us well to shrink away from it. So we must coexist. We must find a way in this era of computing technologies and data mining to find new footing. And I believe that, this is the right conference, right space to be having this conversation. So where am I quickly going back to speech technologies and resources? All of these things up here that we've used in phonetic research to code data, that's a part of what these models are doing very, very quickly, but they're doing it based on well-known computing resources, well-known languages. But independently in all of this, where students and researchers come in, it depends on who has access to training with these resources and also who has access to computing technologies. And I'm going to skip past all of this. We know that these tools can be adapted, but there are still challenges. Languages like Creole languages are being further marginalized, and the majority of these languages, as we know, are not written. And there are people who are working on this. At the same time, when we think about where and how these acoustic models are built, so when we think about voice to text, the acoustic models, again, are not built on Creole languages. They're built on majority languages. And it's these same things that are behind the GPTs that we're then using and wanting to use for how we do this training for Creole languages. The other thing I wanted to say that these models, not only are they biased in terms of using these things for hiring, but they're biased literally in how these models parse data. And Alicia Wassing-Beckford has done research on this, and she shows that racial bias in automatic speech recognition is an emerging area of concern. Other people have looked at this for African-American language, and I've just pulled a couple things here, just in terms of, for example, higher word error rate for when these ASRs listen to a white identified speech versus Black identified speech. So all sorts of things we can think about what this means for Creole languages. But I think at the same time, these AIs offer us this opportunity to imagine, and I'll end here. I got this example from Joanne sometime last year. This is Rodell Warner, who is an artist and is using it to think about a multicultural, multi-ethnic, multilingual Caribbean. He's a visual artist and he asks an AI to generate this what if question. So I'm inviting us to think about the way that we use AI and think about imagining what is possibly in terms of our research in the way that Rodell is thinking. He says, what would the Caribbean look like if cultures brought from the East were not suppressed? What would the Caribbean look like if Africans, Asians, and their descendants became the beneficiaries of their centuries of labor? And so he has these images that are created by an AI. So he plays with both the human curiosity and the limitations of data sets fed to the AI in a practice of this visual note-taking. Each image, he says, is a reference point, something we might take note of in thinking about our present circumstances, in shaping and reshaping, I'm adding, our Caribbean selves and realities for tomorrow. So in ending here, my positionality is let's not shrink away, let's reimagine, let's think, but going with eyes open in sort of thinking about how we might use these tools.
Okay, thanks very much, Shalom. So we already see that everybody who's so far spoken sees very specific uses of it, but also sees some of the problems that Shalom mentioned. But one thing I think that's quite important to mention here is that in both cases, the focus was much more on kind of what people call use cases, namely people are training particular machines to do things, whereas it seems to me that what most people are typically thinking about when they're thinking about AI technologies are large language models. So there seems to be still some issue around large language models and how we are imagining these new technologies. And I think that's important to mention. But before we go on about this, maybe Hubert, you can say a few things about how you are engaging with AI technologies, what you think about them and how they have served you and what you think the opportunities are.
Okay.
Well, my interest kind of in this thing goes back a long way. I have a unpublished manuscript from the 1990s on what is called on the technologizing of languages with specific reference to Creole and more specifically Jamaican Creole. And it looked at the history of, first of all, writing technology, as well, but even before that, the techniques of oral transmission, which are themselves technology in that rhyming schemes and oral devices to help people to remember stuff is a technology. So it looked at that, came through writing, the printing press, and then, of course, the electronic technologies that covered both print and speech, and the kind of world in which we live, which was already face-to-face interaction was only one part of what we did, and that probably even back 20 years ago, the bulk of language interaction was taking place mediated by technology that included both writing and, of course, electronic technologies and so on. So that was the interest. The book I didn't publish it, and then what happened is that somewhere around 2016, Microsoft developed, they made available so much, how should I put it? They made available a digital site where you could, in relation, they claimed that they were helping low-resource languages, and people could load sentences, basically load files with a pair of files, one of them, let's say, in English, and the other one in Jamaican. And there would be side-by-side translations, and you could fine-tune the translating model. This was around 2015 or 16. And we had a course called English in the Digital Environment, and I experimented with the students to fine-tune the model. What happened, the first lesson with this stuff is that in the middle of what was going on, Microsoft withdrew the model because they had started to go into commercializing their translation activities, and this potentially created a bit of a competition. So they pulled it off, and so right in the middle of the course, we got stranded and had to do something else. But so that's a lesson number one in rely on yourself and don't rely on them people and their technologies. Good. So that's where my headspace starts. This 2015 thereabouts. Then, of course, the ChatGPT moment, right? 2019 or thereabouts, and then I am interested now because the interesting thing is that we now have a technology which isn't simply a technology that amplifies the power of language, but a technology that uses language. This is the key thing, that they're using the structures and the huge quantum of language data to actually reason and to learn. So it's a difference between other forms of course, Joseph was talking about AI. AI is not synonymous with LLMs. The LLMs came about because of a very specific single paper called Attention is All You Need, which is a paper that came out in 2017. And they involved these transformers. People use transform in a different sense to us. But ultimately, it was a model that did excellent translation. And so suddenly, whereas previously AI was looking at pattern recognition and facial recognition and all kinds of other kinds of things, they discovered a methodology that that had as its base language. That's the critical thing here. So the difference between AI in general and what we are dealing with now is that the AI technologies become based on the very things that we are studying. And we know more about than them. And why I am happy to was that having had a whole series of I wouldn't say failed attempts, but limited attempts, for example, to collaborate with people in computer sciences and who know programming and all that kind of stuff. I had moved to a point where I wanted to be able to do it myself. I interested in them in their stupidness and their coding and all that because they wasted my time, right? So, the 2017, and they're now working with using language as a basis for interfacing with all kinds of operations in the world, both language mediated and even visual, things and so on. So once the Attention Is All You Need paper came out in 2017, and then the effects of that come up in ChatGPT a few years ago, and so on. And once me having had the Microsoft moment where they cut me out, and then now they make this stuff now immediately available. I say, yeah, good, right? So we get into it now. So the next step, of course, is in terms of what we can do, because you still, the models are there. They are relatively free, right? Even though they're trained on our data and nobody has given us anything, but it is what it is right now. My approach is that we have to capitalize on their robbery, right, by getting busy. What are the things that we can do? Immediately, these models, lots of people have experimented with them. Even though they are not trained on low-resource languages like Jamaican or Guyanese Creoles or what have you, they have what they call a latent ability to do some amount of communication without being trained. We know that after a while they go back, but the point is that as the quantum of data that they're trained on gets larger, they will get better and better. They are getting better and better, and they're getting better and better without us doing anything other than just providing free data to them on the web when we communicate and so on. But so the first question will be, and it's something that I raised with Joseph, should we make available, given the politics of this thing, should we in fact create a set of well-structured data sources for Jamaican, Guyanese or what have you, right, which we make available online innocently, knowing that they will scrape it. And by scraping it, it will improve the performance of their models. The point is that, so we're playing their game. We gain them for free, right? But of course, we get something back. So one of the points then, therefore, is about our data and whether we want to make it available to them for free, because it then gives us the capacity to use their tools, albeit sometimes at a price, but that's another story. So that has come up as an important issue. But moving once the models, so what I was just mentioning is exploiting the latent capacity of the models to provide us with services. Now, where is that going? Immediately for Jamaica, and again, it's a conversation that I've had with Joseph, and hopefully when I get the time, we can pursue it, is this, that the ideal, the golden grail, or whatever they call it, for the Jamaican situation is we could tell the politicians and the policymakers to take a run and jump, because if we can create a tool that allows any Jamaican to interact with any government website and any set of documents put up by the Jamaican government in the language of their choice and in the medium, whether spoken or written, we don't care about no damn government. Let them go to hell. So that's the model. So I grew up in a time when language planning was about approaching the people with power and trying to win them around, and that's what I've spent all of my professional life attempting to do. I am saying at this particular point, the technology may be putting us in a situation where we don't need any help from them, and we can actually start from the bottom. Now, the start from the bottom point now is where I'm going to go now, in terms of what practically has been done so far and where I intend to go with or without the help of the gentleman across there and his entity, right? And it's this. Our next step is I am on a project in Guyana. It's intercultural bilingual education. And it is in relation to our works, or it's focused on, it's the IDB Ministry of Education funded project. And it's focused on the South Rupununi, where the community language, the indigenous language, is Wapichan. And the intention is, original intention was to introduce bilingual education, English and Wapichan, to the children in the area. By the time the project took over that we were involved in, we took the decision that from a pedagogical and a language protection point of view, the project should be monolingual in the indigenous language, because if you introduce English too early, you create the conditions for language death. So anyway, we went into the project, and then all of the interesting things started to happen, because there was a nursery. Now, this is a focus on nursery schools. There is a nursery school curriculum which we were told was on its way out. But there was and we knew that there was a draft new one, which we didn't see. We start the project, and our intention is to train the teachers in the classroom through an in-service program, using the internet and so on, and that they would in fact implement Wapichan language education in the classrooms, making videos of their presentations as proof of practice, and learning start practicing the writing system, getting the technical terminology sorted out, doing the presentations, designing lessons for different aspects of the language and the culture and so on for nursery school children. But what created the crisis was that in January, the ministry, we find out that the ministry had actually implemented a new curriculum, nursery school curriculum, which they didn't tell us about, and that they were training the teachers right now to implement them in English. Now, we are here trying to train the teachers to implement nursery school literacy and education in Wapichan. What the devil do? We don't have no curriculum, we don't have nothing. But this is where AI came in. Because basically, within about, I would say probably, but we had essentially then now to adapt. How were we going to produce a curriculum that would parallel in principle the curriculum for English, but would be appropriate for Wapichan? Now anybody who knows anything about developing curricula knows that thing takes years. However, we were able, using as an input the English thing, which was in a PDF file anyway, and there's an AI tool called Notebook LM. We were able to upload the English document, information, a dictionary of Wapichan, information about the writing systems, et cetera, and to get a passable curriculum model, which we then, of course, ran by native speakers and so on. Our native speaker got everything fixed up and so on, and hopefully the teachers that we train this year are set to implement this new curriculum next year. So Tamirand, who is here, is part of that project as well, and I suspect that she's about to send in the curricula to the ministry in a week or two, right? So it's a living, real thing. And what's interesting, and a little bit of an opening, is that one of the communities is a Creole-speaking community, and even though I haven't got around quite yet to do the curriculum for Creoles, it's one that I want to do as well, because it gives us a foot in to the national training of teachers, nursery school teachers, and the national curriculum in Ghana, which is very similar to the national standards curriculum in Jamaica, in that it's heavy, it has a heavy home language component. So where do we go from here? It now means that even if in Jamaica, whoever says about what they can and cannot do, that teaching materials can be generated to support the home language component of the national standards curriculum in Jamaica, so that, in fact, my expectation, intention, is that once we have sorted out once we've kind of had a better look at the implementation and rollout in Guyana, the next step would be to try to do it here. And it doesn't necessarily, in the old days, you need an expensive project and 40 people to do blah, 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 and so on. Right now, AI will help a few highly motivated people with relatively few resources to create lesson plans, even because teachers are lazy. So if you can give them lesson plans, better for them, right? And that's the beauty of it. You don't have to go and beg the ministry. If you give them the right lesson plans, they will use it because it is easier than making the lesson plans themselves. So the model is, in fact, to facilitate the teachers and use AI to do it. I should mention that one of the problems that another problem we encountered with the project in Guyana was that we only had 6 big books, these picture books that they use to teach literacy, and we needed about 48 or something at the start. Fortunately, we had a course in the production of teaching materials, and that is where AI came in, because we trained the teachers and are still training them to use the software, to use the models that produce pictures. And as a result, the teachers themselves will create their own teaching material and develop the skill to do it. Them don't need no printry, no nothing, no government, no nothing at all. And so ultimately, criminal and crookish, though criminal and crookish, though the multinationals, Google and all of those are in ripping us off, ripping everybody off, and creating huge profits off of freely provided data, right? But we're saying, I do for the Nobia. So we juke them back. We take it, and we do what we have to do with it in order to achieve our objectives. Finish, done.
Okay, thanks very much, Hubert. So I think what we can see now is that we have 3 different perspectives. So, for example, Clive told us about how he can basically train something on his own use, and as a result, he can save himself time explaining the same things over and over again, because the AI can generate it based on the input which the algorithm analyzes using a quantitative analysis, essentially. Shalom noticed largely that AI is useful because it can process relatively large data corpora and at a relatively fast speed. Hubert now tells us that one of the great things about AI is that because it has so much stuff in it, which you noticed came from all different kinds of places, it can also, using the kinds of neural network approach, it can then regenerate things with another input. But I think what everybody, maybe Clive didn't make it that clear, but everybody made clear is that AI cannot work by itself. It needs oversight from humans. There's already oversight with the data. That's what everybody mentioned as well. We need to have that oversight, what goes into it. Right now, it's not always the best stuff that goes into it. We need oversight of what it is producing. And Hubert, I presume that you didn't just pull out the lesson plans and use them, but then there was a process of checking them and adapting them and so on and so forth. So these are all very positive findings. So maybe even in also in light of that the limited time that we have left, maybe we can think a bit more on about what are the kinds of things that we can do to improve these models. So Hubert mentioned that the great thing about, for example, LLMs is that we already have a lot of data that we can draw out. The data isn't perfect, but we could also add our corporas into that data. And I think sometimes companies also buy them. I know for Google Translate, for example, Google buys certain tools as well. Though maybe we can think a bit more about that. Can we see ourselves as providing more data, and how does that affect linguistics in the long run? Right now, linguistics is very much dedicated to analyzing data. Okay, we collect data, but our focus has always been on analyzing. But if we now move into that idea that we want to enrich the models, which is a good idea, broadly speaking, what kinds of issues does it bear, and how does that possibly transform linguistics? So I don't know, Clive, do you want to start saying a few words about it? I think we have about 8 minutes or so left. If you could say something for 2-3 minutes, that's fine.
Well, are there any questions, first of all? Questions from the audience? Anything that...
I think we should move on and then ask questions about that.
No?
Because so far, everybody has just given their personal perspective.
Oh, any questions? Oh.
Is really a response to what you demonstrated for us earlier. So one problem that I have with these AI agents is how much they are presented as human-like. And I'm wondering if it would be appropriate to say that an AI agent should introduce itself as AI agent and say, this is an AI agent. What can this AI agent do for you today? And then, you know, instead of referring to itself as the first person, because, you know, it's, I think, one of those things that is kind of deceptive, and it makes people really believe that there is an intelligence there, and that, of course, is, you know, why Bettina said, I'd rather not call it AI, I'd rather not call it artificial intelligence, I'd call it, I can't remember what you said, Bettina, but it made sense.
Machine learning using language.
Yeah, totally understood, Sylvia. So for some persons, if they're interacting with an artificially created voice or avatar, if it's too human-like, it feels unsettling or uncomfortable to some persons, right? But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure that the average company will tell you that they notice that people who call into their company and they're interacting with an AI agent, if they think that it's an AI agent, they automatically hang up because they prefer to talk to, you know, a real human being. So there are trade-offs to using it. The one that I have created, so for those of you who are late, if you go to cliveforrester.com, it's on my front page. It's on the About page. There's an AI agent there. You can click it and ask it anything about work that I've done. So once you do the call, it starts off by saying, hi, I'm Q, an artificially intelligent agent trained on the work of Dr. Clive Forrester. So it introduces itself as an artificially intelligent created entity, but it sounds Jamaican, right? It sounds like a Jamaican man, like me. I had to do some tweaks to make it sound a bit more, you know, yard man. But it works. So the crucial thing, if there's anything that I'd like to leave with us today, is just go out and try stuff and break stuff, right? I've been using some of these AI tools to enhance the work that I do to make thousands of dollars. No joke, right? So we've been talking about LLMs. Another tool that is free to use is audio enhancing tools. I got a case earlier this year, late last year, from the police force in Barbados, and they asked me to look at some audio that was captured from a closed circuit camera of a crime that went down, and they heard some Jamaican speech on the tape. And it was extremely distorted. And I had to compare what I was producing, my transcript, with what was produced by the police force. And I noticed that the police was putting in some words that I simply couldn't hear. So I ran the audio through this audio processing tool, which is free. I was surprised it was free. And it cleaned up the audio enough so that I could either isolate the background dialogue or the dialogue that was happening in the foreground. And I was able to corroborate or dismiss what the police had in their transcript, and was handsomely paid for this by the police force in Barbados. So, you know, as Professor Devenish said, no, there are no gatekeepers. You don't have to wait on the government, all of these big entities, and so on. And yes, even if there's a bit of theft and thievery on the part of the large companies, then, all right, we have the tools now. Use it, right? This thing where it take weeks, months, years to develop a curriculum. I'm like, I ask myself, how many versions of this curriculum can I create today? Right? Can I create 10 different versions or 10 iterations of this curriculum today? That's how we need to approach this thing. So use it fast, use it a lot, make mistakes, and just start over, and just iterate. And you'd be surprised what you could produce at the end of the day. Yeah.
So, Clive, do you then suggest that we should also upload our stuff? Because one of the big problems that I see is, one of the big problems that I see is that we are using certain kinds of models that are out there, but they might not be 100% adaptable. They need work on them and all of them. And, you know, there's certain kinds of people who create curricula, but we might not love them very much, or we might not consider them pedagogically that sound. So in a sense, what we then need to do is we need to re-upload the new ones in order for other people to see how curricula can also develop. And so my call again, what does that mean for research in the long run?
Yeah, so, I mean, sorry for Canada's jumping in there abruptly, but, I mean, just to remind everyone that one of the reasons the models keep getting better is the human element which is involved in it, which is the fact of the matter is we keep complaining when we see wrong stuff, and what do? Make the corrections.
So on the matter of uploading your own information, who cares? So the AI agent that I created is trained on my publications, which are already publicly available, right? So as soon as I publish something and I wait a little bit so the journal can make some money, I just put it online for the whole world to see, right? So it's already there. All I did was downloaded all of these publications, including my dissertation, including my CV, turn them into PDFs and train it and send it into the thing and say, all right, you know, let's see what kind of questions people will ask and how it will answer. Simple.
Right. Following on the same line, Notebook LM, which is a text version where you load documents on now. It means with Notebook LM, for example, that if you teach a linguistics course or if you are researching an area that is new, you load up all the relevant articles and you ask the thing questions like, what is the difference between the approaches of A and B? How many references to aspect, what are the references to aspect and Saramaccan across these 15 articles? Give me the examples. Are the examples comparable, etc.? It does it for you. Now, obviously, your common sense will require that you look at it to make sure that it's giving you sensible answers. But the fact that it is giving you sensible answers 99 times out of 100 is beautiful, right? Because you're able to do, so I, for example, wrote a paper and was about to send it off for publication, but there was one little point. I wasn't sure, it was research on some songs, and what is the story that is implied by this sequence of songs on this particular album. And I said, but the sequence don't make any sense because the storyline should be X and Y, and that therefore the singer was trying, says me, to misguide the audience by changing the order of the songs. But I asked a Notebook LM, are there any alternative explanations. And it came up with an alternative explanation, which I thought was stupid. I said, no, that don't make no sense. I remember then speaking to Joseph, and Joseph telling me that, yeah, it makes sense. And then when I thought about it, in the end, the version of the article that went out was the one with the AI recommended explanation, okay? Because what it did is that it forced me to take a perspective that I did not have. In the interactions that we're having with it are interactions like an interaction with a very knowledgeable and well-read colleague who is seeing things differently from you. When you imagine that you can, whether as a teacher or as a researcher, go in and put all the articles in and simply say, give me all the explanations for, let me say, aspect in Saramaccan or whatever it is, give me all the examples, identify the cases where the argument doesn't follow or the examples are not parallel and so on. That's beautiful, because just as with human beings, two experts on Saramaccan will not agree. The AI may not agree with you, but there's a very good chance that the AI's disagreement with you is pretty valid and is worthy of kind of taking into account. So suddenly now, teaching complex stuff, rather than going into classes and giving students 500 pieces of reading which they never read, they load it in Notebook LM, and you, whether in class itself or before, you say, come prepared to answer the following questions. Let it query it, let them query it, let them even evaluate the answers. They could ask the AI to evaluate its own answer, or another AI to evaluate the answer. So it's wide open, right? And so the idea about trying to find out or to take the stance, oh, there are things that only human beings can do, that's beside the point. Just do it.
So, as an example I could think of very quickly. So, yesterday I think I was telling Ife that when I came to Canada, I had to carry my transcript data, the courtroom transcripts. It was only 10 transcripts, but it had to be in a separate suitcase when I was headed to Canada, because it was over 1,000 pages of transcript data, right? So I had to put that in a separate suitcase just to carry it. Now, if AI was around that time, Notebook LM, and I could just upload that to Notebook LM, I could have done the analysis while I was on the plane to Canada. I could have done the PhD in a weekend to write it. Well, it's a serious thing, fine? So, you know, and it's such a pity that we can't access courtroom transcripts digitally right now, because they're still printing it on paper. But as soon as that happens, that I think will revolutionize just the study of forensic linguistics here in the Caribbean, easily.
What I want to do...
Maybe Shalom can also get a voice between you guys. Shalom, do you want to add?
I'm enjoying the conversation. I'm enjoying, but yeah, I agree that there's great potential in there. And one thing that I wanted to remind us is, as we share data and we upload, we go back to the ethics in research question, which is a part of the set of questions that I think we wanted to explore here. That sometimes when we go out into communities and we collect data, folks agree to talk with us and be recorded, right? And now, 20 years later, we're saying, okay, we are going to be uploading your speech recorders, submitting them to a particular model. I think we have to be mindful of that too. Well, we know cases of folks, and in doing that, I think we have to think about what kinds of information we have collected in these spontaneous speech things. And, I've met researchers who worked on recordings from people who were involved in the conflict between the UK and Ireland. They don't want to put those recordings out there because they could, those people are probably long gone, but implicate families that are still on the ground.
Yeah.
And so I think the ethics in research thing is something that we have to consider as we kind of forge forward in using these models. And the other side of it is that as we work with these, I love Hubert's idea of engaging students in working with the tools. It doesn't make sense for us to kind of like hide and say, don't do it, because they're going to be using it anyway. So a part of me in the ethics in research and in teaching is equipping our students, our trainees, in how to use these tools responsibly.
Exactly. Thanks very much. And the last thing I might want to add, it's not just about how to use them and what you can get out of them. You need to also understand what the architecture of these things are and what they can do. They are not intelligent. It's working on a particular quantitative idea. So this is also something that we need to understand so that we know what we can pull out of them and what we can do with it and where we need to support these tools. And also one of the things, listening especially to Hubert and to Clive, but also to Shalom, there's a particular sort of research that can be easily done with LLMs. It's the kind of classic type of research or the classic kind of applied work that you can easily do to it. But there are areas that might not be that easily done with these models. And this is something that we need to explore much more deeply. What can we do? What is easily done? What can possibly not be done now? Maybe it can be done soon, but also this whole issue about research integrity and also ethics around using the kind of data that we have, because not everybody wants to know about it, or not everybody wants their data to be shared everywhere. And obviously there's other issues. But yeah, thanks very much for joining Hubert, Clive, and Shalom. I think that was definitely a good start, and we should have more discussions like these at future conferences. Thanks very much. Okay, bye everyone.
So thanks very much to our panelists. Thanks to you, Bettina, for so ably shepherding us through the process. Now for housekeeping matters, the Green Bean Company is here. Today our arrangement is with them. So I know they were set up yesterday. That was a separate arrangement. You can get things from them free today, but you need your conference badges. What we'll do, we'll try to have one of the student assistants help to identify you if you don't have your conference badge, but it's supposed to be free. Please enjoy. The other sessions have started, by the way. So they, yes. So.